Take a look. Look real close. Look at this bear right outside the window. What's he doing? Can you see his paws? I'm seeing him on a monitor. You're looking right outside this window. He's here, and he's here for me. Is he cleaning his paws? How do his paws help him? Okay, as you stare at that image of this polar bear, I want you to pick up your hand. You might not do this every day, but think about your hand. Look closely at it. What does it do for you? How does it move? Today, we're solving that mystery. How does a polar bear use its paws? How does that connect to how you use your hands? My name's Kyle Shutt with Discovery Education, and I'm so thrilled to be on the Tundra on the western shores of the Hudson Bay here in Churchill, Manitoba. And I'm joined by some experts that are so excited to be here and willing to share their knowledge. So let's start with the reason that I'm here with Miss Elisa, who's from Polar Bears International. Elisa, can you say hello and introduce everyone and a little bit about yourself and how you use your hands to bring the story of these polar bears to everyone?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Elisa McCall. I'm the Director of Conservation Outreach and a staff scientist at Polar Bears International. And I have a very cool job where I get to do some education and some science and bridge those together. And this is my favorite time of year when I get to be out here on the tundra. Right now I'm in EV Tundra Buggy 1. We're live streaming polar bears. As Kyle said, we are watching this bear that you're watching live. It's so exciting. And we get to bring out special guests to help us talk about polar bears and celebrate polar bears and explain why they're so cool and how we can all help them.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And we have someone that uses his hands every day as well. Mr. Aaron Blaise, can you please introduce yourself and speak to how your hands are helping you out here on the tundra?
Yes. Hi, everybody. My name is Aaron Blaise, and yes, I use my hands to draw and paint every day. I'm a professional artist. I'm actually an animator. I've been an animator for 38 years, and I've done some films that maybe you know, like The Lion King and Beauty and the Beast, and I just finished a film called Snow Bear about a lonely polar bear living in the north. And so now we're here, and I'm getting to see polar bears in real life, and I can draw them right here.
Incredible. And as we go throughout today, you're going to learn a lot about the history and the experiences that these two experts, these two talented folks have. Aaron, can you speak to the students that are watching with us a little bit about your experiences around bears in general? Because we're going to get into a drawing lesson in a little bit about between brown bears and polar bears. But I know you don't only study bears, correct?
No, I study all kinds of animals. But I just finished a film about snow bears, about polar bears, and I also directed a film called Brother Bear, which was about grizzly bears. And so comparing those two, I learned a lot about grizzlies when I made that film, and I've learned a lot about polar bears when I made Snow Bear. And there are, obviously they're both bears, but there's a lot of differences between the two and a lot of similarities, but a lot of differences that I thought maybe we could go over today.
Yeah, and so let's talk a little bit about that process. This is your first time here, correct?
It is. This is my first time in this area in Churchill, Manitoba. It's incredible.
And I think there's something really powerful there as well that the students should learn, and that is that you don't have to be in a place to learn about a place, to get to know a place, to build that knowledge. How do you build knowledge to learn around, you mentioned it a little bit, but can you go into depth around building Snow Bear and Brother Bear? How did you learn to be able to draw these characters?
Yeah, so I made Snow Bear before I actually came here. This is my first time here. So what I did was I read every book I could find about polar bears. I watched every documentary. I just kind of immersed myself in information to learn as much as I could about polar bears, polar bear behavior, the way they look, the way they move, all of those things, all the things that an animator would need to know in order to portray a bear on the screen as best they can. When I made Brother Bear, I did the same thing. I read every book I could find, every video I could find, and then I actually did go to some of the places, and I take all of that knowledge and I boil it down and I create the films.
Excellent. And I want to go back to Elisa, because Elisa, you and your team do such important work in being able to bring images like this polar bear right here. Decided to take a little bit of a nap, kind of cuddled up. Maybe it's getting windier and colder. We're not quite sure. But can you speak to how you work with other partners and why you're able and how you're able, in fact, to bring these images to classrooms all around the world?
It takes a huge team to do what we do. So you don't have to be a scientist. Some people on our team are scientists, and that's great. But we need people with all sorts of different backgrounds, and we need different partners to help us bring polar bears to you and do polar bear science. So we're out here right now on EV Tundra Buggy 1. We needed a special mechanic to build this electric vehicle powered machine. We needed engineers, we needed designers, we needed so many different people to help us do that. We also partner with Frontiers North Adventures, and we partnered with Noble Northern to bring you out on EV Tundra Buggy 1, and then we partner with explore.org to live stream the camera so you can see the polar bears live that we're seeing. So we are a relatively small organization, but we have a huge impact because of working collaboratively with people from all different walks of life, and by working together, we can amplify our voices and amplify what we love and move things forward.
So Elisa, can you speak a little bit to where we are? I know that, and just these polar bears in general, and we're going to prime Aaron because we're going to get to a drawing lesson. So this is a little bit of a pause here too for those classrooms.
Pause, I hear you.
So if you have that printable graphic organizer, or even if you don't, grab a piece of paper, grab a pencil. This is your time to grab that, okay? And while the students in the classrooms are getting their piece of paper and pencil ready, Elisa, can you go ahead and speak towards the polar bears in this region, where polar bears exist, and just a little bit more around the bear species in general up here, because we want to talk about adaptations eventually and why they're here.
Right. Yeah, set the stage a little bit. So polar bears are a marine mammal. They are a bear that has adapted to use the frozen ocean. They are a sea ice adapted bear, and they've done that because of what they eat. They're really mainly eating seals, ringed seals and bearded seals, and more than that, they're really going after seal blubber. They have all sorts of different adaptations that help them hunt seals and digest seal blubber very effectively to make them the biggest bears in the world. They eat a lot of fat, they get a lot of energy. So a lot of adaptations that we'll talk about today have to do with them living on the ice hunting seals. Of course, Churchill, you might be asking now, well, why is this bear sleeping in a bush then if it's an ice bear? In some areas of the polar bear's range, polar bears do come on land for periods of time. Polar bears live around the circumpolar north, so not right at the North Pole, but in a circle around it where the ocean's a bit shallower. They live in Canada, Russia, Norway, Greenland, and Alaska in the United States. And in some of those regions, there's no sea ice in the summer, so the bears have to come onto land. And they've adapted to do this too. They live off their own body fat. There's not a lot of seals on land, so they're not eating much, if anything. And so they're spending months here. And like this polar bear, you can tell he's being a little bit lazy right now, isn't he? He's conserving his energy. He hasn't eaten for months, so they're resting. They do play a little bit. They're still, now that it's getting colder, winter's coming, so they're a little more active. But pretty soon we'll see even more bears coming to this area, and the ice will freeze up in the next 1 week to 4 weeks maybe. And then these polar bears, as soon as there is ice, they're gone. They're out there, they're hunting seals again. So this is a really cool little window where we get to watch these polar bears live as they hang out, they be lazy, they play, they have fun, and we get to bring them to you.
Excellent. Let's talk about the anatomy and something, Aaron, that I would love for you to, first you can set up the worksheet if you don't mind. I think we have a camera, so if you can get us set up for, how to draw a brown bear paw and a polar bear paw.
I'm going to go ahead and just draw a circle right here.
Okay.
Pretty good circle. And then we'll draw a circle right here. And we're going to draw two comparisons. So I think the students, if they've got a worksheet, they can do the same thing. Yeah.
And when you're thinking about these bears and you're thinking about their paws, anatomy, you told me you study that a lot, right?
I
you
do.
learn the mechanics of how the animal moves. Can you speak to that as
Yeah.
you're setting up?
So one thing that I find that's really interesting about a lot of different animals, mammals mainly, is bear paws and human hands are very similar. If you look at the skeletal structure of a bear, their skeletal structure is very similar to our hands. Okay. And so when you look at your hands, you see a thumb and you see 4 fingers. And when you look at a bear's skeletal structure, you kind of see what is our thumb and then the 4 fingers as well. And so those paws, except, they're built very much the same, but very big, obviously, much bigger than ours. Now, there is a difference between a grizzly bear paw and, say, a polar bear paw. They've adapted for different, usages, right? So the biggest difference probably is in a grizzly bear paw. And the other thing too I want to mention is that they've got a wrist just like we have. They've got they've got a radius and an ulna in their forearms just like we do. And so that forearm comes down, and I'm going to draw a grizzly bear paw first.
Okay.
And so it comes down, and right where the wrist is, it's going to come down, and then it's going to flare out. Because if you look at your hand kind of flares out, right?
Okay.
And so it happens the same way on a bear. And now on the back side of the bear, on the back side of their paw, we have fur that comes off the back, like here. It comes down, and so here's that wrist. So imagine my hand coming down, and right here, well actually it's more like this. Imagine my hand coming down, and we have a pad right here. Everybody has this pad on their hand. Well, that's the pad that a bear has, right there. Boop, they just stand right on that. So it comes down, and right there, and then at the bottom of that, we've got their 5 toes. There's a toe here, a toe here, a toe here, a toe here, and a toe right here. So you can see, and it's kind of creating this kind of round shape. See that? And you kind of got the tendons coming down. So I'm drawing a little bit fast, so don't worry. We'll stay on here long enough for you guys to draw with me. But we have, you notice that we get this flared out kind of look. Now, we have these pads on our fingers too, right? And that's what bears have as well. So imagine a bear's paw with with the fingers sort of like that. So we've got these toes that come down. And you've got these pads that come down, like so. Like this. See that kind of paddle shape. Now here's the biggest difference between a grizzly bear and a polar bear, and that is their claws. Look how big these claws are on a grizzly bear. And I'm going to draw right here. I'm going to color them in too for you. See how long they are? Grizzly bears use their paws to dig up roots, to dig, into the dirt, grizzly bears eat a lot of vegetable matter as well as, animal protein, but mostly plants. And they do that by digging up roots and grubs and all kinds of stuff. So then I'm going to draw a little bit of fur coming off of here. Look at that. Now we've got these big grizzly bear paws. And I'm going to color that in a little bit too, because they're brown, right?
And for students that are budding artists,
yes,
and they're thinking about what you're saying and how you're describing what you're doing,
yes,
where did you start to be able to create this just from memory? How does that come to life, and what advice do you have for those students?
I studied everything I could find online, in libraries, out of books, on video, everything that I could find about grizzly bears. Now, on top of it, I went to the zoo, I went to Alaska, and I was very lucky, working at Disney, we brought bears into our studio.
Really?
Yes, we did.
Wow.
We brought bears into our studio where we could draw them. They brought them up on stage. They were very well-behaved bears. And they brought them up onto the stage, and we drew them. And we were able to do that as well. So there's a grizzly bear paw.
Incredible.
Should I draw a...
Yes, well, yes, and...
Yes.
I think the students probably have heard that idea that form follows function.
Yes.
So if we can just have Elisa for a minute talk about what she sees, and you mentioned around what the grizzly or brown bears, what they eat,
yes,
and how that's the function, that's what the paw needs. Elisa, do you have anything to add around brown bears in general?
Yeah, I mean, Aaron's explaining it so well. The brown bear is, of course, a terrestrial or a land bear, and it's considered more of a generalist when it comes to diet. So they really need to be using their paws and their claws for a lot of digging. You've probably seen them catch fish before, but they're also digging a lot in the earth. They're looking for roots. They're walking on the land, and that really comes out in the form of their foot that we see and the way that their claws are shaped. They're quite long and slightly duller on the tip than a polar bear's claw, which we'll get to.
Thank you. And there's a question here to set up the drawing of the polar bear. I'm trying to give Aaron plenty of time.
Totally.
Yes. As an artist,
Yeah,
I
take your
love
time.
just letting the
There
students
we go.
watch what he does.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
just sitting here drawing away.
All the
So good.
extras is just amazing to see how you do that.
I love it.
And we have a number of questions coming in.
Great.
In fact, Kim Artsy wants to know.
Kim Artsy, what a perfect name.
Yeah, how about it?
You got a great name, Kim.
Since polar bears' primary hunting season is in winter, does it impact their survival or health at all, not having a season of hibernation? So she's already getting to that idea that their paws are so needed for survival, and that this is really a survival story when you look at their paws. Elisa, can you answer that a little bit as far as their survival of polar bears?
Yeah, so polar bears are a little bit different than brown bears in the way they handle their energy, and polar bears do not hibernate. And in fact, brown bears and polar bears kind of have the reverse schedule of their year. So brown bears, they're gorging in the summer and they're getting as fat as they can into the fall, and then they're going to go into hibernation for the most part and kind of sleep it off while they lose access to food. Polar bears, once the winter comes, they're out there, they're hunting seals, they're gaining as much weight as possible. We used to think that when polar bears came to land, maybe they did have some sort of walking hibernation. We know they don't go into dens and rest or anything, but we do know that they will get a bit lazy. But it turns out they don't have any sort of hibernation at all. They just kind of have to adapt behaviorally. And like this guy that we've been watching, do a bit more snoozing and sleeping for the most part.
Okay, back to our lesson. Thank you,
Yeah.
Elisa. Talk to us, Aaron. What are you doing? Where did you start on this drawing, and how are you differentiating it a bit?
So you can see the two paws. I'm drawing the polar bear paw the opposite direction as the grizzly bear paw. But you're going to notice I'm drawing the paw a little bit bigger because polar bear paws in size, first of all, polar bears are bigger than grizzly bears on average, but their paws, even in relation to their bodies, are much bigger than grizzly bear paws. So polar bears use those paws not just to catch seals, which they will do, but they use them as these giant paddles. When we go swimming and we use our hands, we make paddles out of them to swim through the water. Well, polar bears have this ability because they've got these giant paddle-shaped paws. And the other big difference is that fur. If you look at the fur that I'm drawing right now, the fur almost just kind of flops off the sides of the paw. And they've got this really wonderful adaptation. If you look underneath their paw, all the fur grows between their toes. There's lots and lots of fur. So just a little bit of the pad actually touches the ground. And I remember Elisa saying that pad is kind of sticky, right? It really sticks really well to the ice. And so the claws here, I'm going to draw them. They're nothing to sneeze at, but they're not long, giant claws like the grizzly bear has. They're a little shorter. They're still pretty formidable, and they can still use them to capture their prey with like seals and that sort of thing. But they don't have that long, sloping feel to them. Like a grizzly bear paw or claw can be as much as 6 inches long. Whereas I'm not sure what the length of that's a nice little blow of snow right there.
How about it?
I'm not sure. Do you happen to know how long polar bear claws grow?
They'd be 2 to 4 inches sort of thing. Yeah, so they are shorter. They're good like little seal hooks.
Yeah, so it's a substantial difference between that and grizzly bears. But you can see right off the bat, they've got these big pads, and also the size of the paws helps them. It kind of works like snowshoes, right? When they're walking along, it helps them kind of keep from breaking through a lot of the snow and ice and that sort of thing.
So as you keep drawing, any tips for the students that are trying to make their best bear paws right now?
So, if you get kind of confused on where to put the fingers or the toes and where to put, the different parts, and I'm drawing the front paws right here. Look at your own hand. Imagine your hand like this, and that can, like my old wrinkled skin hands. You can imagine your hands like this, and put your hand on the table, and that helps. It mimics the shape of a bear paw. If you put your fingers like this, it really does mimic that same shape. And so that's what I imagine. I imagine, the forearm coming down, there's a wrist right here, and it flares out just like my hand flares out. And we come down and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 toes, just like that. And those claws come right out just like our own fingernails come out right there. And you can see I'm drawing these lines coming up as well. Right there, that's meant to mimic the tendons that we have and those bones that the bears have in their and their paws right there. And look at the big moppy fur that comes off the edges. There's a lot of fur that comes off those edges right there. Standing on that snow right there, there's our snow.
One of the things that always interests me is your perspective, how you see the world, how then your imagination kind of, you capture a moment or you capture a visual and then you put it to paper. Can you speak to how you do that? And then specifically, why did you choose to have this perspective of the paw rather than, say, the underside of the paw?
Oh, that's interesting. I can do that too. I just, because I'm always imagining the bear, walking along and how he stands as an animator, I'm always thinking about weight and weight shift and the way they move their legs and that sort of thing. So I tend to just draw that paws kind of standing on the ground. That's a really good question, because it's rare that I'm going to be animating the bear's paws like this. So I usually think about them like that.
Yeah. And as an animator, you're thinking about movement, which is back to the mechanics and how everything works.
Let me flip it. Let me just go to another page and we'll draw the underside of a bear's paw, if that's you want to do that.
That would be excellent. I think so. And perhaps, if it's okay, unless you have something else you want to share, I'd love for Elisa to speak a little bit more around those adaptations in the polar bear that you were referencing, Aaron, because polar bear's paws are suited for some very specific uses that are very different from the brown bear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things I've loved talking to Aaron about this week is the sort of adaptations, because I kind of understood and learned about them from a scientific point of view, but Aaron, just from studying bears for so many years and drawing them and thinking about why the bears are shaped how they're shaped and watching them, has been able to, figure out what all these functions are in the form. I think it's so interesting. So he's really nailed it. Polar bears have bigger paws that really act like these snowshoes to prevent them from falling through the snow and the ice. They've got the shorter but very thick and sharp claws that are perfect for grabbing slippery seals, and the underside of their feet are quite furry, again for more warmth and a little bit sticky where they do have pads, almost like winter tires scraping the ice. Aaron also mentioned that their fur kind of falls a little bit differently. Polar bears have two very thick layers of fur. They have kind of an under downy layer that is like a really fuzzy woolly sweater, and then an over top layer that's more like a rain jacket. So it wicks the moisture away. We know it's thick. It's actually not white. It is clear, but it looks white or sometimes creamy to our eyes. It's also hollow, and that hollowness we think helps trap warm air against the bear's body. So it is a little bit different than the brown bear fur that again is more for a land-based bear. It doesn't quite have to be so thick, so it falls a little bit differently and it looks a bit different as the bear moves, which Aaron has picked up on from watching documentaries. So yeah, get out there and watch bears however you can.
So back to you, Aaron.
Yeah, so here, what I've done is I'm drawing the underside of a bear's paw. And one thing you'll notice, remember I was talking about that pad that we have. We've got this pad right here on our own hands. It comes across like that. We all have that. And that is exactly what this is right here on this bear's paw. It's the same anatomy, just a little bit different. And then here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 toes that come down. Ours are come across the top here, and we've got a thumb down here, but there's still 5 that come across. And then there's, imagine your pad right here on your hand. This is here, that little part right there. And everything else is all this really dense, short, very dense fur right here. Lots and lots of fur right here, and they've got the little separation between the toes. And you might just see a little bit of, there's a claw, there's a claw, there's a claw, looking at it from this perspective. You can see little bits of claw. And the other thing too, as I'm drawing kind of the edge of the paw right here, as I draw it, imagining him holding his paw up like that for the camera. This gets kind of, especially now, walking across the ground and everything else, it gets a little bit dirty. So you can kind of color in that bottom part of the paw. Like so. And all this fur coming off.
As as you're doing this, Aaron, it makes me wonder, as an animator, of
Yes.
course, the students, you've given them tips on looking at their hands and making that comparison and pushing down and then looking at the anatomy of a bear. But you think through the eyes of an animator.
Yes.
And what does that really mean for those students? Because you don't just draw this one image.
No, I draw, matter of fact, let me flip the page again,
Okay.
and let me give you a little quick demonstration on how I think as an animator, because as an animator, I'm thinking just not in this view or these views that I showed you here. I'm not just doing that. I'm thinking of the entire form. So if I need to draw a paw, let's see, I'm having a character lift his hand up. Well, I've got to think about his arm coming down. I'm thinking about that forearm, and there's his wrist, and I'm going to draw this very quickly. And there's the paw coming down like so. And there's a forearm, and you can kind of see now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there's those claws coming down. So now you can see, really quickly, I've got a bear arm. Now I want him to lift that up. So now I got to think about, that arm is starting to come towards me, the wrist is coming up a little higher, and maybe that arm, the hand is kind of changing the angle a little bit. Now we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you can see there's a little bit of a change in the angle. And now I want him to come up even higher. And so now I'm going to bring that wrist up, and we're getting a totally different view of that paw. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the wrist is coming up. And now we're starting to see underneath the arm. So you can start to see that it's animating up. And then it's going to come up even higher. And so now we're going to come up, and now maybe he's lifting his paw up in the air. And now we're going to see underneath and the tops of the toes. And so the point I'm trying to make here is that I'm thinking about this anatomy not just in 1 or 2 different angles. I'm thinking about the entire shape and how that shape moves within itself, how the anatomy works, how the physiology works. So I'm thinking about all those different forms all working together so that I can think in all these different terms. And so if you look from one to the next to the next to the next, you can see that animation.
Remarkable. How many drawings, if you had to estimate, of bears
Have I drawn?
would you say you've
All of them. No, I've drawn. That's my answer. Whenever
That's a great
somebody
answer.
asks me how many
How
drawings,
many?
I just
All
say
of them.
all of them. No, I've drawn, well, for Snow Bear. Snow Bear is an 11-minute film, and it took about 11,000 drawings to make Snow Bear.
Wow.
And that's just one film. And then Brother Bear, which is a full feature. Now I had a crew, there was a crew of about 350 people. We all worked together to make Brother Bear. We created about 1 million pieces of art to make Brother
Wow.
Bear. Yeah.
I think that's
So-
so remarkable and important for the students to consider as well. It's not one and done, right?
No.
It's fun, but it's a lot of work. That's
It's-
a lot of work that I hear.
You have to love drawing and you have to love animation to do animation. And I do. I love animation. I've been doing it for almost 40 years, and I hope I get to do it for another 40 years.
Well, you mentioned Snow Bear, and I would love to talk just a little bit about that and transition to adaptations of polar bears as a whole. So if you can talk about Snow Bear and how you use this idea of drawing, this inspiration of where you are right now, and you bottle that into then storytelling, I think it's so pivotal to a polar bear's life and the survival of polar bears. Can you speak to that some?
Yeah, so I wanted to tell a story about loneliness. And from our point of view, from a human point of view, when we see polar bears out there, when I see one polar bear kind of wandering across the tundra, that seems to me, I can't help but project my own emotion onto that, this lonely existence. And so I thought, as a filmmaker, that would be really interesting. That would be an interesting point of view to tell a story from. And so I used that as my inspiration. I got in there, so I started learning about polar bears as much as I could, but then I injected that emotion into the story and told this story. Now, out of that came a lot of other things that came out of like the idea of climate change. This bear living this lonely existence is going through some of these issues that he's going through in my story because of climate change. And so, the more I studied, the more I was able to make the story even more rich. Yeah.
Fascinating. Elisa, speaking of adaptations, we're getting a number of questions there. In fact, there's a great question from a school in, let me check it, we want to make sure we get it correct here, Henrico, Virginia. And they wanted to know, what's your favorite polar bear adaptation?
Ooh, my favorite polar bear adaptation, it's kind of a sneaky one because it's not one that you can see with your eyes, but it's the way that their digestive system has adapted, has changed from their brown bear cousin to process fat. So polar bears are much more efficient at eating and processing blubber and turning that into their own body fat. And in fact, if they're given a choice, they will eat about 80% fat and only about 20% meat. They eat fewer fruits and vegetables than any other bear. They do not process those as effectively, whereas the brown bear cousin can eat fruits and veggies almost exclusively with a bit of protein and do okay. But polar bears really need that fat. And if humans tried to eat as much fat as polar bears or had that much fat in our diet, we would get really sick. But polar bears have some special genes that means that they are actually the most fit when they're the most fat, which I think is pretty fascinating.
I'm envious.
Right? It's pretty cool.
Now, you spoke earlier, Lisa, around these being marine mammals, and so of course the paw then has another use, and that's for swimming.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that? And maybe, I'm not sure if we have the clip, maybe we could show the clip from snow bear when they're swimming, and if not, that's something that the students can look for. But how do polar bears use their paws for swimming, and how far do they swim? Talk to us about that adaptation.
Right. Polar bears are truly amazing swimmers. Now, when it comes to catching seals, they can't outswim a seal. They really do need that ice to help them sneak up on seals. But when polar bears do go swimming, they're powerhouses in the water. So they can swim for a long time if they have to, if they need to make it to another ice floe or get back to land. In fact, the record was a polar bear that swam for 9 days. She swam over 600 kilometers, which is over 400 miles, I believe. And yeah, she did that largely without stopping. Now, she lost a lot of body weight. Swimming takes a lot of energy. So polar bears actually don't want to have to swim like that. That's not ideal. But when they need to, they can do short swims, and they're very agile in the water. So they're using their, as Aaron said, their big front feet as paddles, and they're doing a bit of they swim like this, kind of a type of doggy paddle. We'll call it the bear paddle. And they use their back feet to steer when they're going straight, but they can also dive underwater and use their back feet to spin around and do loops and go all around. And we know that they can also dive to find food at the bottom of the ocean floor. So not huge dives, but they can definitely go get seaweed or even scavenge dead animals down there, has been seen. And they'll hold their breath for over 3 minutes and look for food. So they're at home in the water. They're absolutely a marine mammal.
Excellent. We have another question here from Los Angeles. Hello,
Cool.
third graders in LAUSD. They're in Yorkdale Elementary, and they would love to know, are polar bears, or how are polar bears adapting to this idea of a changing climate?
It's an excellent question. The climate is changing pretty quickly, and polar bears are a relatively long-lived species living into their 20s or 30s, and they reproduce slowly. So polar bear bodies can't keep up with how fast the world is changing. So we're not going to see polar bears have different fur or anything in the next decade or two as the world warms. So we do know that we need to act now to protect their sea ice home, protect their marine frozen ocean habitat so polar bears can keep being polar bears. That said, polar bears are very intelligent, very curious, and they're still bears, and they like to eat. So we have seen them figure out certain ways in certain areas of the world to find food. So whether that's scavenging more on dead animals, whether that's hunting reindeer in Svalbard, which is only a short-term solution, but can give them some food. We will see them change a little bit and figure out ways to eat while they can. But we do need to keep working on climate change to keep polar bears in the Arctic for a long time.
Thank you. Aaron, coming back to you, I think the
Yes.
students are now realizing how long and the effort involved in drawing. We've been drawing for, what, say 15, 20 minutes,
Yes.
just seeing what you're creating. And so the question that's coming through is, how do you work through a big project like Snow Bear, 11,000 images? How do
Yes.
you work through something like that?
We always say that creating an animated film is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And just like if you do marathon running, you set little goals. You know, I have a goal for myself each day, you know, a certain number of drawings, then I have a goal for each week, I have a goal for each month, and I have a goal through the process of making the entire film. And when you set those little goals and you can achieve the bigger goals, and then, you know, it snowballs after that, no pun intended. But then, you know, after a while, next thing you know, you've got a finished film. But it really does require setting these little goals and setting schedules. You know, we really scheduled out how we wanted to make this film.
Okay, excellent. Coming back to the drawing, there's some wonderings around you're using pencil right now, and these are kind of where you start.
Yes.
Where would you go from here depending on what you're trying to create?
Well, if I'm trying to do animation, a lot of times I'm drawing pencil drawings like this to learn about the form and the anatomy and everything else. When I started animation back in the late 80s and early 90s, I was animating on paper. That's how we did all of our animation. We did it, you know, when we made the Beauty and the Beast and the Lion King and Mulan and all these other films and Brother Bear, we animated everything on paper. But then around in the mid 2000s, late 2000s, I started animating digitally. Now, I'm still drawing, I'm still doing everything by hand, but I've replaced paper by drawing on a tablet. And so we do all that. And what that does is it saves me time of having to take each drawing and shoot it under a camera and to go through that process that we do with paper animation. I can just instantly play it back, so it becomes much more efficient. But the beauty of it is that it's still hand-drawn, it still has that human touch that I crave so much in hand-drawn animation.
Okay, and now out here, I've seen you bring some color. You just brought the white.
Yes.
When do you then get past the pencil?
Yeah, so a lot of times what I'll do is I'll sketch in, these are meant to be obviously demonstrations for you guys, but if I'm doing something that I want to do a little bit more finished, a lot of times I'll bring a pencil. I have these white pens that I have, I've got watercolor paints with me, I've got all kinds of supplies that I bring, and then I'm able to sit down and actually do some painting. As a matter of fact, I have one right here that I painted right out on the Tundra. There's one here that we did, and this is a watercolor and brush pen and all kinds of different mediums that I put in here, acrylic pens, and then I've got another one right here from a bear that actually was not too far from here, just off in the willows, and we drew him live right there on location. So I bring all kinds of supplies with me, yes.
Incredible. We're so thankful and appreciative of your willingness to share your talents
Oh,
and your
I am
expertise.
so honored to share it with you guys. I just absolutely love this, so thank you guys.
Is there anything that you'd like to tell the students as we wrap up here around how they can use their creativity and any last messages that you'd like to share?
Yes, and that is, you know, do it because you love it. I have always loved drawing. If you love to write, if you love music, if you love drawing, if you love sports, no matter what you love, follow it, pursue it, do it to the best of your ability, put your whole heart and soul into it because it is your passion and you can do that and you can make your life doing that. I am living proof that you can go out and you can make a living as an artist or anything else that you follow your dream. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Elisa, coming back to you, how would you like to wrap? How would you like to encourage those students to really think about how they can use their hands as they go into the next couple days even?
Oh yeah, well all of your hands, your minds, your voices are so powerful. You have so much ahead of you, so many choices you can make, so many paths you can go down. And as Aaron said, choose what you love. That will really propel you forward, and you have so much to offer so many different areas of the world. So love what you love, share what you love, protect what you love. That's why we're out here with the polar bears, sharing them, protecting them, and we know that the world can be a really bright place if we all work together, and we're super hopeful. And thank you for watching and being interested, and thank you to our guests today. It's so fun to be out here with you and with everybody watching these polar bears.
I love that. So students, I want you to pick up your hand again, right? Aaron showed you how you could articulate your hand and put it down on the desk, how you can think about how it's connected to polar bears, what we have in common with all kinds of creatures out there. And now I want you to think, how can you use these hands and those brilliant minds of yours to create and to inspire other students today, tomorrow, next week? We can't wait to see what you're going to do with your hands. Thank you for joining us today. Have an excellent rest of the school day. Take care.
Future generations of people and polar bears depend on the decisions and plans that we make today. A polar bear's life cycle is almost exclusively tied to the sea ice. Because polar bears rely on sea ice to hunt, to breed, and sometimes to den, sea ice loss from climate change is their biggest threat, and the reason the bears are listed as vulnerable on the IUCN's Red List of Threatened Species. What we learn about climate change impacts on polar bears in Hudson Bay can be applied across the Arctic to help conserve other populations. Climate change is already affecting some populations of polar bears. Since we get most of our energy from fossil fuels, we are producing huge amounts of carbon dioxide. You see, regular amounts of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere act like a blanket around the Earth, trapping heat and keeping our planet at a stable temperature. However, when we burn fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas for energy, we pump rampant amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. This buildup thickens the blanket, trapping too much heat, disrupting the climate, and melting Arctic sea ice. When Arctic waters are cold enough, the top layer freezes into a special type of ice called sea ice. Sea ice is to the ocean what soil is to a forest. It supports the entire Arctic food chain. Food from this marine ecosystem also sustains northern communities. The key to getting the climate back to functioning the way it should, and to preserving a future for polar bears across the Arctic, is to move away from using fossil fuels for energy altogether. The most important thing we can do is vote with the climate in mind to let our leaders know we support a swift transition to renewable energy sources. In the meantime, we can directly participate in and learn more about our local and regional renewable energy options. We can all make a difference outside our own households by influencing where our energy comes from. Because together, we can make sure that polar bears roam the Arctic sea ice for generations to come.